Hello and welcome to more history stuff. So this is another video about the life and career of Gruffudd ap Gwenwynwyn, Lord of Southern Powys in mid-Wales in the 13th century. We left him in the year 1277 in the aftermath of the war between Edward I of England and Prince Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, Prince of Wales. And Gruffudd was in a very good position because in the aftermath of this war he had managed to finally secure his ancestral lands in Southern Powys, drive out his enemy Llywelyn, and in the immediate aftermath of the war, his control of these lands was confirmed by the king. So he's got control of them permanently now. He's never going to lose them again, bar some unforeseen catastrophe. And what happens in the following months and years is very, very complicated, very fragmented. What happens in general is that the destruction of Llywelyn's power in Powys, in mid-Wales, leaves a vacuum into which everyone else who's got some claim to land or power or authority in the region comes clustering sort of to try and grab as much as they can. And of course they're all competing with each other. And Gruffudd and his family are very much involved in all this. So there's a lot going on in this period, and I'm going to be looking down at my notes a lot because it's impossible to memorize it all, and I want to give a generally sort of accurate picture of events. So the Treaty of Aberconwy, whereby Llywelyn surrendered to the king, that occurs in November 1277. Shortly afterwards, Gruffudd's eldest son Owain, who has been in Llywelyn's custody since 1274 because he had conspired with Llywelyn's brother Dafydd 3 years earlier to try and kill Llywelyn, to assassinate him, and ever since then he's been in Llywelyn's prison. Under the terms of the treaty, Llywelyn is obliged to release him, so Owain is released and he rejoins his father Gruffudd in Powys. Gruffudd is then made the custodian of the castle of Dolforwyn, which is this important castle that Llywelyn had started building in the early 1270s in Cedwain in mid-Wales. And the purpose of this castle was to buttress Llywelyn's defences in mid-Wales, create a new market, a new town, so he could generate extra revenue inside the Principality of Wales. But what actually ends up happening is that he loses the castle as part of the consequence of his defeat in 1277, and it ends up in the hands of his dynastic rivals, the princes of Southern Powys. Gruffudd holds onto it for a time, but then he hands it over to one of his sons, also called Llywelyn, confusingly. Gruffudd has, I think, 4 or 5 sons. And then after this, you get this very confusing situation, as I mentioned earlier, in which everyone who has some kind of claim in Powys starts competing with everyone else to try and grab as much land and territory and loot as possible. So I'll read out some examples to give you an idea of what's going on. This is in the months and years after Llywelyn's defeat in 1277. The immediate aftermath, really. So Gruffudd is challenged by Roger Mortimer of Wigmore, who is Llywelyn's cousin. They're both descendants of Prince Llywelyn the Great. And Roger Mortimer is another very important lord on the Welsh Marches. He fought alongside Gruffudd in the War of 1277 against Llywelyn, but of course as soon as that war is over, everyone reverts to type and they all start fighting each other again, especially along the marches. So Gruffudd's control of the lands of Cedwain and Kerry is challenged by Mortimer, not on the battlefield but legally in the courtroom. And these nobles, they seem to have spent their lives either fighting each other in a military sense or legally. They've all got teams of very busy lawyers who are constantly challenging for all of these competing rights to land and territory. And this seems to be what these lords enjoy doing. They're either at war or law. War or law, that's what they do. And Gruffudd actually loses his case against Mortimer, and the lands of Cedwain and Kerry, they pass into the hands of Roger Mortimer. So Gruffudd's hopes that he could incorporate these lands into his lordship, into a greater southern palace and extend his borders, in this sense, are frustrated. And he also has to accept the loss of the land of Gruffudd, which I struggle to pronounce. That's another chunk of territory in the Marches. Gruffudd had, about a decade earlier, managed to conquer it from his own relatives, the Corbetts. The Corbetts, of course, yet another Marcher family. But Peter Corbett, he had served Edward in the War of 1277, so he's also riding quite high in royal favour and can rely on the king's support. And Peter manages to recover this land, Gruffudd, from Gruffudd, after Llywelyn's forces had again been forced to retreat. So what happens is that the Marchers in 1276 to 77, they put up this show of unity for once. They combine to defeat Llywelyn on the king's behalf, and they drive out Llywelyn's soldiers, his troops. But as soon as that's done, as soon as Llywelyn is gone and he's defeated, this short-lived unity, it fragments, and the Marchers all start fighting each other again, which is quite typical behaviour. They're all acting in their own self-interest, and the reason they support Edward in this war is because they all want to get rid of Llywelyn, because as soon as he's gone, then that's great, happy days. They can all start trying to grab as much for themselves as possible. All self-interest in this era, all the time. So Gruffudd has actually lost out in these two examples I've given, but he does well in other areas. So he manages to allocate quite large territories to his wife, Haywise, and also settle quite a lot of land among his sons in 1278. Which shows that he's quite confident now that his hold on southern Powys is very secure, because he can afford to start parcelling out bits of land among his family, and which means that he's got total control over them. If he can grant land to someone else, then obviously he's the one who is in control of that area, and he's not going to lose it to someone else. He faces other challenges. He's vexed by the complaints of the men of Montgomery, which is an important border town and military base for the English, that Gruffudd's market at Welshpool was damaging to their trade. So you've got two competing markets here, Gruffudd's market at Welshpool and then the English market at Montgomery. And the English at Montgomery are complaining to the king and saying that Gruffudd's market is damaging their trade. And there's a suggestion for a while that Gruffudd's market at Welshpool should be moved. But what's interesting is that in the end this doesn't come to anything, and Edward quietly drops this case, and he orders the market at Welshpool to be restored to Gruffudd. Now this is interesting because it's an example of the kind of favour that the king is showing to Gruffudd in these years. Edward is well aware of the balance of power on the Welsh March and what he's got to do to retain the loyalty and the control of the most important men in this very sort of turbulent region. Gruffudd is one of Edward's most important native Welsh allies, and the king knows that he can't afford to annoy him. Gruffudd has reached such a peak of power and status and local influence at this point that he has to be kept happy. The king's got to be careful in how he treats Gruffudd, and to give him pretty much everything he wants, while at the same time not letting him have too much. You can't let him be too powerful, but at the same time you can't alienate him, because in the past, when Gruffudd felt that he wasn't getting what he wanted from Edward's father, Henry III, he simply defected and he switched his loyalty to Prince Llywelyn. And that could easily happen again. I mean, Llywelyn might be defeated, but he's not dead. He's still very much alive. He's still got his title. And Llywelyn he's also got his own plans. He wants to rebuild the power base that he's lost in this catastrophic war. It was a total disaster from his perspective, but he's not beaten. In these 5 years between 1277 and 82, Llywelyn does all that he can to try and quietly reconstruct his power base in Wales so he can challenge the English king again and hopefully do better second time round. And one of the things that Llywelyn does is he comes to a private agreement with Gruffudd's seneschal, seneschal being like a chief steward. The term in Welsh is disdain. So this man's name is Gruffudd ap Gwen, and he is Gruffudd ap Gwenwynwyn's disdain or seneschal. He is pretty much in charge of administering Gruffudd's lands, quite an important official. And again, I'm reading from my notes. So as I turn the page, yes, here we go. In 1278, this is just a year after Llywelyn's defeat, he made contact with this seneschal or disdain, Gruffudd ap Gwen, and he invited him to Llywelyn's court at Penrhos in Anglesey, the island off the coast of Gwynedd, northwest Wales. And here they came to a private agreement where Gruffudd ap Gwen promised to support Llywelyn in war when he was invited, and that Llywelyn would maintain him in possession of all the lands and possessions that he held, and that Gruffudd ap Gwen would come and join Llywelyn when he was summoned, even if his lord, Gruffudd ap Gwenwynwyn, didn't want to have anything to do with it, even if he said to his seneschal, no, you can't do this, I forbid you to join Llywelyn. So what has happened here is that Llywelyn has come to a separate private agreement with one of Gruffudd's officials and obtained a promise of military support from him, which Gruffudd ap Gwenwynwyn either doesn't know anything about, but this is all done behind his back, or the other option is that Gruffudd does know about it and he permits his seneschal to come to this agreement, because if another war should blow up and Llywelyn wins, then from Gruffudd's perspective it's better to be on the winning side than on the losing side. So he allows his servant, his seneschal, to come to this agreement as a sort of insurance policy. It's very devious, sort of underhand stuff, because Gruffudd owes loyalty to King Edward. In fact, he owes everything to King Edward, because without his support he would never have reconquered southern Powys. But at the same time, like everyone else, he's very pragmatic, totally self-interested. And it seems that he was allowing his servants to make these sort of private deals with Llywelyn, which the king almost certainly knew nothing about, because he would have been furious if he found out. So as I said, like as an insurance in case of future wars, future disasters. And I keep making this point, but it can't be made enough, really. People like Gruffudd are totally self-interested. They're only loyal to someone else insofar as that works for them. And it goes no further than that. There's nothing, we might say there's nothing personal about it, it's just business. That's really what this is, it's just business. So this is all going on, and as I said, very complicated situation. One of the other things Gruffudd does while he's engaged in all these legal battles and all these secret agreements is he starts trying to extend his authority into northern Powys. Now he is the lord of southern Powys. Northern Powys, not Paris, is a very fragmented territory. It's ruled by several dynasties. But back in the 12th century, Powys used to be united. It was under a single dynasty, but it was broken up in the late 12th century. And Gruffudd might have ambitions to try and unite it again under his lordship. He certainly tries to extend his power over some of the weaker dynasties in northern Powys. He's very predatory. If you think of him as like a big predatory animal devouring the smaller ones, this is very much what he's doing. So for instance, he attempts to extend his lordship over Mechane. Now Mechane is one of the small lordships in northern Powys. It's ruled by several brothers, which makes it even less important because which means it's divided, it's fragmented, and thus quite weak and easy to sort of for a greater power to dominate and conquer. And Gruffudd successfully pushes into Mechane, forces the lords of Mechane, these brothers who rule the lordship, to give him their support, to bow the knee, to swear the all-important oath of homage and fealty to Gruffudd. And this district, this region of northern Powys, is absorbed into Gruffudd's territory, becomes part of his lordship, and he has effectively conquered it. So he's gone part of the way towards reuniting this broken lordship of Powys, but he's doing it in a very aggressive. There's no sort of element of winning the friendship of these rival dynasties. He's not trying to persuade or inspire them to accept his authority. He's doing it by force. He's doing it by military force and by legal force. He forces these lesser dynasties to submit to him in exactly the same way as Llywelyn does when he tries to extend his power over the rest of Wales outside Gwynedd, and in exactly the same way as King Edward does when he tries to stamp his authority on Wales, much later on in Scotland. There's not much cooperation going on here. It's all force in one way or another, legal or military. So that is what is going on in these years. As I said, it's very complicated, very difficult to give you all the details in a single video. So this has gone on for quite a long time, and I'll finish this one here, and then we'll carry on with the doings of Gruffudd another day. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.